Good afternoon, INVO team. I'm pleased to be joining you for our Wednesday afternoon INVO All-Stars. I hope you and your loved ones remain healthy and safe and are taking time enjoying this beautiful weather together. Before we get started, I want to thank you for the feedback we received following our first webcast. I appreciate your comments and suggestions on how we can improve this webcast going forward, as well as the topics or questions you would like addressed. In fact, most of today's webcast will be spent on those questions. So please continue to send those through your manager or directly to Bill McGrew. Also, you may have seen the request from Dan Sandoval for any personal pictures or short video clips of your home workstation or remote work life. I reviewed some of the clips and I'm going to share with you toward the end of this webcast later. So it is a great opportunity for us to see each other and share a personal moment together. As we settle into what is currently our new normal of working remotely for at least a few more weeks, I want to encourage each of you to stay strong, positive, and try to find enjoyment and humor where you can. It is critical we find ways to fight the cabin fever that may be coming on. And as our governor noted on Friday, hold the line and continue the actions we are doing, such as sheltering in place, performing only essential travel and social distancing, as these efforts are making a large difference in flattening the curve and will help us get to a point where we can start returning to a normal environment. I would like to share a personal experience with you. So last week, there were a few cold and rainy days in Sacramento. And on one of those mornings, I sat in my backyard, gazing over the gloomy sky, and then suddenly, sadness set in. When will we reach the end of this teleworking? It has been heartbreaking for all of us to see the human toll this pandemic has taken. And we do not yet see a clear end. And I miss seeing my friends and my colleagues. So on that note, I reached out to Eric Baxon, who has been a mentor and a great friend to me. So basically, I told him that I'm depressed by the situation. And then we went on to have a long conversation about current situation, about life, about financial markets. And then toward the end, we were laughing together again. So my point is that we're only human, and it is okay to feel sad, anxious, and even a bit depressed under the circumstance. And when that happens, please do not be shy and reach out. Share it with your loved ones, your friends, and even your colleagues at work. In addition to being a shoulder to cry on, we need to continue to cheer each other up and remind each other that together we'll manage through this and our team and our portfolio will come out stronger. There will be a tomorrow. Because of this experience of mine, I would like to share a few mental health resources with you, and we will send out the links in a follow-up email. The Surgeon General's Stress Playbook is the California Surgeon General's simple how-to guide for people to follow at home to de-stress. They also have information on tips for helping children de-stress. I have one app on my iPhone. It's called Headspace, which is a great app that offers some free resources such as deep breathing exercise and meditation, as well as UCLA has a free mindful app. So again, as I said, we'll send out the details of these apps to you via the follow-up information. Now diving into today's agenda, I think we'll follow a similar format to our prior one, where I will first provide a quick staffing update, then move into what has been happening in the markets and in managing the portfolio, and then finally we'll spend most of our time on your questions. So first of all, staffing update. This week, I have one recent departure to note. You may have seen the goodbye announcement from Tamara Sales, an investment officer within the Global Equity Unit. Tamara was with us for 6 years, most recently working within the Corporate Governance Unit. Tamara won't be far as she joined CalPERS, and we look forward to be partnering with her going forward on share owner campaigns and other efforts. Environment. She will be directly assisting me as a member of our TFAS team. Letitia is a local product graduating from California State University, Sacramento, with a degree in communications and a strong commitment and passion for the development of our Sacramento community. Exception was jobless claims, which have risen by some 17 million in just 3 weeks. There is a rise in the unemployment rate for April to 14% or higher, up from 3.5% just 2 months ago, and well above the 10% high during the global financial crisis. US CPI inflation data started to show the expected deflation in travel-related sectors. This week will bring us significantly more color on the contractions in both the US and global economy. The US reports key regional Fed and home builder surveys for April and how both retail sales and industrial production fared in March. The IMF will publish its spring World Economic Outlook and is expected to reduce its old forecast for 2020 global growth of 3.3% to a level much lower than the negative growth of negative 0.5% experienced in 2009 during the global financial crisis. More policy responses gave some comfort to financial markets last week, including the Fed announcing 2.3 trillion in lending support, extending the size and the scope of existing facilities and launching 3 new ones. On the fiscal front, rumors over phase 4 stimulus package by the US Treasury continue to build. In Europe, the ECB and the Bank of England each implemented measures to promote lending and liquidity. And then on the fiscal front, late last week, EU financial ministers agreed to another stimulus effort. On the back of this development, I highlighted on our last webcast, given that the high degree of uncertainty and the challenging market conditions will almost certainly continue, flexibility in managing the portfolio remains critical. We continue to hold daily calls with representatives from across the office to discuss market transaction liquidity, our own balance sheet liquidity, our portfolio risk positioning, and the market views, so that we can fully understand and effectively manage the liquidity and the risk positioning of both the perf and affiliates. Now, I would like to move on to a portfolio topic on which I received a few questions, and it's something you likely saw in a few news articles last week, which is about our decision to eliminate the explicit options-based tail risk hedging program. For large and complex portfolios such as ours, we often have a top-down portfolio construction themes, and then we build a portfolio of strategies to reflect these themes. A top-down portfolio decision often consists of several individual strategies. One should not take an individual strategy out of the portfolio context and analyze it individually. Further, time periods for review of portfolio decisions warrant careful attention. CalPERS is a long-horizon investor, so decision-making efficacy should be viewed over a similar horizon, especially when reviewed with the benefit of hindsight. The recently raised question focused on just one part of the portfolio strategy, the explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy, and analyzed it only for the period of the recent market rot and assumed perfect market foresight capability. Just to be clear, such explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategies are valid investment strategies and can be useful for some investors and during certain time periods. Different types of investors have different utility functions and risk appetites and operate under different organizational constraints. Researchers such as the research by Bob Littman in 2011 titled as Who Should Hedge Tail Risk? And then the other paper by Andy Imanda in 2012. By the way, both papers published on FAJ and the title as Do Financial Markets Reward Buying or Selling Insurance and Lottery Tickets? So both research have shown that for large institutional investors with a long investment horizon, low leverage, and sufficient humility to question our ability to time markets. It is not economical to buy explicit tail risk hedging, especially considering the cost and the lack of scalability of such insurance strategies. Without perfect foresight to time the market, we do not believe explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy is a viable long-term strategy for large institutional investors such as CalPERS. So basically, the termination of explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy is not about the validity of such strategies, but rather about the fit in the construction of our portfolio. In December 2017, our board approved risk segment works as drawdown mitigation measures, which are cheaper and more scalable drawdown mitigation measures than explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy. As we continue to enhance our balance sheet liquidity management and develop a centralized governance structure, as part of the broader active risk review in 2019, the termination of an expensive and unscalable insurance strategy became apparent. So basically, we chose better alternatives for market drawdown protection, and they turned out to be better alternatives during the recent market run, when those two risk segments added more than $11 billion of drawdown mitigation benefits. Now onto the cost of such explicit option-based tail risk hedging strategy. These type of strategies usually cost about 3 to 5% of the protected notional amount, about half of the expected return from the underlying assets being hedged. Remember, these tail risk hedging strategy, we were mainly concerned about market drawdown from the global equity portfolio. And the average of the CMA capital market assumptions for global equity going forward is somewhere around 6 and 7%. And the insurance cost through this kind of explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy would cost more than half of that, which is 3 to 5% of the protected notional amount. The cost estimate of 3 to 5% of the asset under protection is considered an average of the strategies being tried out at CalPERS and across different market environments. The components of the cost was in two categories: the option premiums and fees. The option premium expense was the highest and most variable of the expense, was roughly about 80% of the total cost, and is dependent on the structure of volatility in the markets. The fee structure is usually about 20% of the total cost, including sometimes base fee and incentive fee, varies from manager to manager. Also, with an explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy, similar like insurance, one would have to pay this insurance premium regardless of market conditions. In contrast, in fiscal year 18-19, a relatively benign market environment with limited opportunities for an explicit tail risk hedging strategy to generate returns, our risk mitigation segment work added more than $2 billion of relative value. So not only are these risk segment work more effective at hedging against market drawdown of the tail risk, they are also more economical. So now let me address the scalability issue. So in addition, given the size of our portfolio, it is not only uneconomical, but also ineffective to purchase explicit tail risk hedging. These type of strategies are often executed in the options market, where due to lack of depth to the market, it is difficult to gain enough exposure to be meaningful to the size of our portfolio. Our own experience indicates that even a $10 billion asset under protection would put the market capacity to a test, let alone the hundreds of billions of dollars that would need such protection in our portfolio. So as we continue to learn the cost and the scalability of such strategies, in December 2019, as I mentioned that the board approved the risk segment work as risk mitigation measures. Also, one of the three portfolio priorities that our board adopted The first one is to mitigate market drawdown risk. At the June 2019 investment committee, we had an extensive discussion with the Committee on Market Drawdown, where we answered a series of questions such as what is a market drawdown and what can be the potential impacts on our portfolio? And more importantly, how are we positioned to mitigate such negative impacts on our portfolio? At the June IC discussion, as well as a few other occasions, we discussed the implementation of risk segments, such as factor-weighted equity and long treasuries as drawdown mitigation measures. And we are glad to report that during the peak to trough of the recent market rot from February 21st to March 23rd, these risk mitigation measures provided a drawdown mitigation benefit of more than $11 billion. So with that, I also would like to take one step back and from the higher level, a more philosophical question. What was the original intent of an explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy? And that answer lies, why are we averse to market drawdowns as an individual and as an institutional investor? Why do we need insurance in a market drawdown? So for an institutional investor, it could be the case that the plan will not survive an extreme market drawdown that would force us to default on our financial obligations. Or the plan may not have the means, i.e. liquidity, to maintain its desired long-term risk exposures, thus compromising its ability to earn a 7% return in the long run. So to some degree, our fund, CalPERS, experienced each of these scenarios during the 2008 and 9 global financial crisis. And both concerns were related to our balance sheet liquidity management and a lack of a centralized portfolio management framework. So in response, CalPERS made many changes since the global financial crisis and is now in a much better position to survive and even thrive in the event of a severe drawdown. And these changes include migration to total fund portfolio management, including a centralized governance structure, enhanced balance sheet liquidity framework, including visibilities into both the sources as well as the uses of liquidity at various time horizons. Third, the risk segment works, such as factor-weighted equity and long treasury segments, which are scalable, effective, and inexpensive. So here's a historical background of these strategies. The explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy were added to the portfolio in August 2017 as an experiment and implemented as an active risk. Our board approved the risk segment work in December 2017 with an effective date of June 30, 2018. As we continued with the implementation of risk segment work, we continued to learn about this active risk experience and continued to compare and contrast these two approaches, namely the explicit option-based tail risk hedging approach and a cheaper and more scalable risk segment work. In 2019, we also developed a comprehensive balance sheet liquidity management framework and a centralized governance structure. Then it became clear that such explicit tail risk hedging strategy, as part of the broader active risk review in 2019, it became clear that such explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategies were no longer warranted in our portfolio. So basically, we had a better option, better alternatives to hedge market drawdown risk. We chose a better alternative, and then it was proven to be a better alternative during the most recent market rot. So what are the lessons learned? We developed a drawdown mitigation plan via a thoughtful, consistent, and logical process, and the plan is largely working as expected. However, there are some lessons to be learned from the recent market rot, such as the effectiveness of diversification benefits from interest rate duration. But terminating expensive and unscalable explicit options-based tail risk hedging is not one of those licenses. If we were to review the strategy again today, we would make the same decision, even with perfect foresight. It is important to make this point clear, as one of the senior INVO team members recently mentioned to me how this individual regrets the decision of terminating tail risk hedging strategy because what we know now about COVID-19. For one, as an investor, we should have the humility to know that we do not have perfect foresight, and few could have forecasted that COVID-19 was coming. And for two, even had we had perfect foresight and had we known the COVID-19 crisis were coming, as an investor, we would still have terminated this explicit options-based tail risk hedging strategy. And instead, we would have gone outright short on our equity exposure because that would have been a less expensive and more scalable strategy. But of course, we need to remind ourselves we do not have perfect foresight. We are proud of the level of transparency that public agencies such as CalPERS provide and welcome public scrutiny. We do believe, however, that when looking at the hundreds of investment decisions, big and small, that we make in a year, that they be reviewed through a portfolio context and using a long horizon lens. We also constantly remind ourselves to be humble enough to acknowledge that we do not have perfect foresight, and we should not succumb to behavior biases such as resulting bias and hindsight bias. Now, let's move on to other questions that were submitted. Given the interest in time, total I received 8, but I will address 4 today and then the other 4 for the next week, since we took some time to address the question on tail risk hedging strategies, and I will still try to keep this webcast around 30 minutes. Before I answer your question, I want to thank you again for you submitting the questions, so please continue to do so. The first question is, what is the process whereby if asset class specialists see dislocation or opportunities in their sector that they think can benefit the total fund, they can flag it to the CIO or investment committee? How do we compete between best ideas to benefit the total fund? So that was a question, and that's a really good question. And it is at the heart of our objectives to be mindful of total fund portfolio and performance, 2 of our 4 strategic Ps. And this is also one of the reasons we centralize the research and strategy research under the RSG group under the leadership of Kevin Winter. So as I have encouraged all of our INVO team members, please elevate opportunities to Kevin Winter, who leads our research and strategy group. The next question I received is, if a team member takes family leave during the COVID-19 pandemic due to illness or childcare, do we have a system for deploying temporary help to support the responsibility of those team members? And this again is a very important question, and the solution is focused on one team, with individuals from other areas across INVO pitching in to carry out the related responsibilities. And on this note, I'm very happy to report to you that this is happening already. INVO, the opportunistic strategy group, is rushing to set up our capability in private debt so that we could better take advantage of extreme market dislocations as we see it today. And OS needs help with aspects from of these strategies. And then team members from private equity and global fixed income are stepping in with resources and expertise. And I will ask that each of you keep an eye out for future opportunities across INVO where your experience or expertise could help doing similar transitions. Another question, what have you learned during this crisis? And I love this question. So off the top of my head, I learned, first of all, how to cut my own hair, well, with some help. I also learned that our house is not big enough, as I mentioned from last webcast. I learned that Bill McGrew does not need to sleep at all, and he can just work round the clock, day after day. I learned to appreciate more and more of the basic things that we used to take for granted, such as going to see a movie on a Saturday night or just walking to your office or cubicle to talk to you in person in the office. I learned to be even more proud of our INVO team. We continue to manage the size and complexity of our portfolio through this market volatility and amid a public health crisis, and doing so remotely. I learned that you can never tell your loved ones how much you love them often enough. So please take a moment or two to tell them every day how much you love them and try to spend some time together. I learned the importance of planning in advance and the preparedness. I learned the names of our neighbors. I learned that we all work even harder when working from home. There's almost no boundary between work and home when you work from home. And also, when you are on the phone all the time, you lose the sense of the day of the week. Everything just blends together. So, on this note, please take time to find balance in life and Bill, that includes you as well. So, what I have not learned, I have not learned how to make a dish. I have not learned how to wash dishes. I have not learned how to resist the urge to turn on the phone in the middle of the night to check on Asian markets. Okay, so the final question, how are we going to perform the IC meeting next week? We will conduct the investment committee and board meetings next week remotely. That is, the IC presenters and board members will participate via WebEx events. For all other members of our team, I highly encourage you to watch the online streaming of the committee meetings. So those were all great questions. And for those four that didn't have time to answer this week, I will make sure to answer them next week. Please do keep sending them in, and I will be sure to get to them at our next event. In closing, I know I say this so many times that it may be sounding repetitive, but I'm really so thankful and proud of the great work this team continues to do. We continue to address the challenges that we face head on and from a good position because of all the hard work we performed over the last year or so. I want to sincerely thank each of you for your efforts, as well as the great work that continues to be completed on behalf of our 2 million members. And with that, I will sign off, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Let me leave you with the following montage of your great pictures with a special thank to our INVO and CWIN partners. So team, stay calm and carry on. Be well, and I will see you next time. Thank you.